Good day, everyone. I am Amelia Redin from Women for Biodiversity, and it is an honor to welcome you to this side event to the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development Agenda, which aims to find ways how advancing gender equality and human rights to stop the biodiversity crisis. This event is organized by Women for Biodiversity and FARM and co-convened by UN Women, OHCHR, UNEP WCMC, and WWF. Before starting, I would give some guidelines to make the most of this session for everyone. First, kindly rename yourself with your name and organization, so we all are aware of the diversity of people gathered today. And if you want, you can also use the chat box to introduce yourself, telling us from which country you are and the main activities your organization does. Secondly, if you have any questions, comments, please type them down in the chat box and indicate for whom among the speakers your question is to facilitate the process of answering. Para aquellas personas que necesitan interpretación al español, les pedimos que den clic en el botón con firma de globo que aparece en la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccionen la interpretación al español. Muchas gracias. For those French speakers, we deeply apologize because today we won't be able to provide interpretation for your language. For everyone, please note that the event is live streamed on the Facebook page of Women for Biodiversity, and kindly help us spread the word and share the video with your networks. Share your insights using the following hashtags: gender is a biodiversity issue, SDG 5, SDG 14, and SDG 15. And remember to tag us at Women for Biodiversity and all of our co-conveners today. Well, now please let's begin. And I would like to start making explicit the objectives we would like to achieve with this session. They are particularly two. First one is build synergies between the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the Sustainable Development Goals high-level political forum processes to build back better from COVID-19. And the second objective is to showcase specific recommendations from the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework discussion in mainstreaming and strengthening the human rights-based approach to achieving SDGs 5, 14, and 15. And to do so, we have the honor of having Silvia Hordos, Policy Advisor and Intergovernmental Support at UN Women, who will provide the opening remarks for this event. And we also have our 5 stars panel integrated by Catherine Despot Belmonte, Senior Program Officer at the UN Environment Program World Conservation Monitoring Center, Christina Egenter, Global Governance Policy Coordinator at WWF International, Shruti Ajit, Program Officer at Women for Biodiversity, and Benjamin Schachter, Human Rights Officer and Environment Team Leader at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Please welcome all of them. And I will give now the mic to Silvia Hordos, Policy Advisor and Intergovernmental Support at UN Women, to share with us your initial thoughts on how advancing gender equality and human rights will contribute to stopping the biodiversity crisis. Please, Silvia, thank you so much for being with us now and give us your thoughts.
Silvia, we cannot hear you, sorry.
No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
So, I was saying thank you very much for being here, and thank you for the opportunity of joining you. Today is SDG 5 Day at the HLPF, but obviously for all of us here, gender equality is central to what we do every day of our work. Gender Inequality coupled with climate and environmental crises are the greatest sustainable development challenges of our time. As this year's HLPF reviews progress towards SDG 5 on gender equality, together with goals 14 and 15 on life below water and on land, and as we prepare for the finalization and the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework later this year, we have now an important opportunity to explore the synergies between these two distinct and complementary processes. Despite progress in some areas, we know that the world is not on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. Out of 18 indicators for SDG 5, none have been achieved, and only one is close to target at this point. The distance remaining is long and time is short. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed back the limited progress reached. The linkages with goals 14 and 15 are clear. Women's greater dependence on and unequal access to natural resources, public services, and infrastructure mean they are disproportionately impacted by environmental degradation and climate change. On indicators related to Target 5.8, those related to ownership and secure rights over agricultural land and laws that guarantee equal land rights, we don't even have sufficient data at this stage to measure progress. Insecure land rights make women especially vulnerable to land grabbing for large-scale environmental projects. These indicators are relevant to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and they provide an opportunity to align the 2030 agenda and the new indicator framework. While it is important to acknowledge that women suffer disproportionate impacts from biodiversity loss and climate change, it is vital to recognize women as actors and agents of change and rights holders in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And it is important to ensure their full, equal, and effective participation in decision-making and leadership related to biodiversity. As you know, earlier this year, the Commission on the Status of Women recognized the disproportionate gendered impacts of climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters on women and girls. In the outcome of the Commission's agreed conclusions, governments committed to integrate gender perspectives into the design, funding, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of relevant policies and programs on climate change and environmental degradation. Governments also agreed that they must increase financing for gender-responsive climate, environmental, and disaster risk initiatives and support women's organizations, enterprises, and cooperatives. Really importantly for this discussion, the Commission also called to strengthen normative, legal, and regulatory frameworks to fulfill existing commitments under the Rio Conventions, also taking into account the gender action plans. All these recommendations are highly relevant to both the HLPF and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Over the years, UN Women has engaged with the Convention on Biological Diversity by making submissions on gender perspectives, organizing workshops, meetings with experts, and partnering with organizations such as those in this panel. We have advocated for a transformative and gender-responsive post-2020 biodiversity framework and a standalone target with gender equality priorities. There are three key priorities that we would like to see reflected in actions related to the Convention. One is women's full and effective participation in decision-making. Two, equal rights to and control over land and resources. And third, equal access to benefits derived from resource use. A gender-specific target would serve to guide all biodiversity-related planning, policies, funding, and implementation, clearly from a gender lens, and I would add also from a human rights lens. A gender-specific target would also ensure that funds are allocated to progress towards those priorities. We look forward to continue working with partners like you and parties towards a gender-responsive global biodiversity framework to contribute to achieving also the Sustainable Development Goals, including goals 5, 14, and 15. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for these words. You definitely show us that the topic we are discussing this session is urgent, key, relevant, and promoting synergies between development and environmental policies are really crucial, and more even if they are crossed with the human rights and gender equality approach. And with this context established, we are now going to move on to our panel discussion. Not without first reminding you, dear audience, that if you have comments or questions during the session, please write them down in the chat box, because later on we will dedicate 30 minutes so that there is a dialogue between you and the panel. And now moving into the round one of this discussion, to highlight opportunities to enhance synergies between the Convention on Biological Diversity and the SDGs, in particular analyzing how the implementation of the post-2020 GBF can help achieve SDG 5 and contribute to SDGs 14 and 15 and others. We want to focus on the synergies between these two agendas. And the main questions are, how could the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework contribute to achieving SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG 14 on life below water, and SDG 15, life on land, and advance human rights? In relation to SDG 5, we ask the panel to focus on what are the most promising strategies and actions today for overcoming gender inequality and discrimination, and how can the empowerment of women and girls accelerate SDG progress, but also help to recovery from COVID-19 and implement the biodiversity agenda. And concerning SDG 14 and 15, we would like our panel to tell us about concrete measures. How could these measures could help reshape the human-nature relationship and set development on a more sustainable path? Please kindly provide some examples while addressing these questions. And to start the conversation, we want to hear from you, Ben Schachter, from the Human Rights Office on Human Rights. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and greetings, everybody. My name is Ben Schachter. I coordinate the work of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights on environment and climate change. It's our pleasure to be co-convening this discussion with the others, and to have you join us here today. I'm going to discuss and share with you some thoughts about how the process that will begin later today of the UN General Assembly on the potential adoption of a resolution to recognize the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is both informed by and should inform the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the negotiations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So let's start with a little context. In October 2021, the Human Rights Council passed its resolution 48/13, which recognized the human right to a healthy environment for the first time. The resolution encourages states to adopt policies for the enjoyment of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as appropriate, including with respect to biodiversity and ecosystems. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development emphasizes that human rights must lie at the core of truly sustainable development that cuts across the economic, environmental, and social dimensions. For years, rights holders have pushed for universal recognition of the human right to a healthy environment, building momentum toward the Human Rights Council resolution adopted last year and the General Assembly negotiations that are going to begin later today. The Sustainable Development Goals clearly make the case. Achieving them, including the protection of biodiversity, will not be possible without gender equality and the fulfillment of the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Gender, biodiversity, and human rights, including the right to a healthy environment, are inextricably intertwined. Gender equality is both an SDG in itself, as well as a necessary means for successfully and sustainably achieving the other goals, including protection of biodiversity, SDGs 14 and 15, which is a key element of the human right to a healthy environment and critical to ensuring all people have safe and adequate food and water, that they are healthy and their livelihoods are protected, that they can participate in decision-making, and that ecosystems and climate systems which sustain life on our planet are protected. Environmental harms also drive inequalities, disproportionately affecting women and girls and those in vulnerable situations, leaving countless people behind. Unfortunately, those who speak up to demand environmental justice and protect our environment, in particular women, girls, and persons with diverse gender identities, often do so at great risk to themselves and to their communities. This is inexcusable. In a world in which all life is at risk from nature loss, climate change, and pervasive pollution, a situation the Secretary General has described as humanity's suicidal war on nature, environmental defenders should be heard and honored, not threatened, shamed, and sometimes even killed. So, all people everywhere are entitled to exercise their right to the effective enjoyment of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment without fear of repercussions. The right empowers people to participate, access information, and access justice in environmental matters. It recognizes the fundamental interlinkages between human health, well-being, and dignity, and that of the environment in which we live. States have an opportunity to reflect this reality and demand gender-responsive, rights-based action in their negotiations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, including by supporting the standalone goal on women's rights and gender equality. They can also do so in the pending negotiations to recognize the right to a healthy environment at the General Assembly. But recognition alone is not enough. The Stockholm Plus 50 outcome calls for action to implement the right to a healthy environment, including in the context of multilateral fora, such as the High-Level Political Forum and the negotiations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. A gender-responsive, human rights-based approach is how we reshape the human-nature relationship, support implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and achieve the transformative change we need for people and planet. This is why OHCHR is advocating for integration of human rights in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and why we support the standalone target on women's rights and gender equality. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Ben, for your words and letting us know how important is this topic for the Human Rights Office, and particularly how much you are doing to raise awareness and boost policy action around this. Now is the turn of Shruti Ajit, Program Officer at Women for Biodiversity. Please, Shruti.
Thank you, Amelia. It's a real honor to be part of this panel. Good day to everyone. So 7 years ago, when the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted, there was a sense of hope, direction towards living in harmony with nature in the midst of climate crisis, extractive consumption patterns, and overall destruction of biodiversity. This blueprint was a guide for countries to address these crises in a just and equitable way. 7 years on, and we still have a long way to go with regards to this. And on top of that, we are still recovering from the pandemic, which has severely impacted the work that we intended to do to achieve these goals. The recent Sustainable Development Goal Progress Report highlights the decrease in rate of loss of forest areas and increase in key biodiversity areas or areas under key biodiversity areas from the last 2 decades. However, it is still not enough to tackle the urgent needs of Earth and its inhabitants towards a peaceful and harmonious living. The report also mentions that it has disproportionately affected women in every aspect, be it health, education, or biodiversity conservation. So the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework seeks to address this immediate urgency through carefully listing down the targets on biodiversity conservation that aims to halt and in some cases reverse the effect of biodiversity loss and degradation. Within that framework, it is only imperative that we build in institutions, systems, and processes that aim to include especially those whose lives are intimately linked to biodiversity and the ecosystems around them, especially the indigenous people, local communities, women, and youth. The only way ahead is to include voices of the most marginalized and dispossessed within these forums, where we do not see them as stakeholders, but equal participants and beneficiaries of the work we all intend to do in order to protect and conserve biodiversity. Women need to be in the forefront of the discussions as globally, impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss have further aggravated their situation on the ground. Women now have to travel longer to collect water, food, firewood from the forest for their families and households. There's an increased incidences of gender-based violence, and their participation in key decision-making body is still something that is being debated and constantly needs justification, even though their contribution impacts various aspects of health, livelihood, and conservation, and they are also known to be keepers of traditional knowledge systems. So with that, when we talk about gender equality, we shouldn't see it in silos, but for its full realization needs to be viewed in a more integrated and intersectional way. The Target 22, which is part of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is a standalone target on gender, seeks to ensure gender just and gender responsive response to building synergies. That is also building synergies with the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the ones which Amelia mentioned, 5, 14, and 15. So we wish to have a gender responsive and human rights based approach to be considered even within the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, so that it is then being able to help in the full realization of not just the framework, the Global Biodiversity Framework, but also aims in aiding the full realization of the Sustainable Development Goals that we've had for 7 years now. So with that, I'm going to end. Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for your insights, and let us know how particularly women on the ground are living this biodiversity crisis, and for stressing the importance of governmental and international commitments to eradicate the inequalities they face. Thank you so much. Now let's hear from you, Catherine Despot Belmonte, Senior Program Officer at the UN Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Center. Welcome.
Thank you, Amelia, and good day to everybody. I think a lot already has been said by Sylvia, Ben, Shruti, setting the scene on current progress and challenges. So before thinking about the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, we need to continue focusing on the design. And all of us in the panel have contributed towards the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. A lot of the technical inputs from UNFWCMC and UN Women have precisely focused on enhancing synergies with the SDG process. So we hope that by designing a framework that is well aligned, especially to SDG 5, 14, 15, 17, we will be able to achieve both the targets set in the post-2020 framework, as well as progress towards the achievement of SDG 5, 14, 15, and 17. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for your thoughts. And now moving on to the final part of this first round on synergies between the CBD and the SDGs. Please, we want to hear from you, Christina Egenter, Global Governance Policy Coordinator at WWF International.
Yeah, thank you, Amelia, and welcome everybody to this important panel and discussion. As all of my fellow distinguished panelists before me, I think, share the most important points. And I maybe will echo some of them just to reinforce the message. And it's actually good. This is not repetition. It's actually showing convergence. And I think this is the most important thing that needs to happen for stronger gender equality. I'll share the perspective of coming from a conservation organization, WWF, and where we realized that beside nature, gender equality and rights need to be reset at the center of sustainable development and conservation, of course, and including building back after the tragic pandemic. Supporting, safeguarding, I would say, biodiversity and gender equality are to be recognized as effective development strategies. SDGs will not be achieved without securing what Ben eloquently explained, biodiversity, but also healthy, clean, sustainable environment, and of course, fulfilling and protecting the right to it. But it's not just a general global biodiversity framework. We need an ambitious, transformative, inclusive, just global biodiversity framework to support the achievement of SDGs. One that values biodiversity, all nature's contributions, and I underline all of them. It's not just the economic value of nature to society, but also the agency, those behind and those custodians, those keepers of biodiversity and sustainable use, especially the agency of women. There is definitely, as mentioned by in the opening remarks by Sylvia and others, there is a momentum building. There are gender plans of action in all Rio conventions, and this is extremely important to reinforce synergies towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. But what else needs to happen? And I'd like to just say a few words on a critical issue, the one of visibility and recognition. Without visibility, there is little recognition. And we know in the informal economic sector in particular, while statistics are going up, there is good numbers, rising numbers about women occupation in the formal context, but in the informal sector continues to be dominated by women without the due of rights and protection in many ways. And the parallel critical situation of an informal sector exists also in natural resource management. And this is the big gap that the GBF also needs to address, ensuring that the contribution and roles and practices of women to defend, protect, and sustainably use biodiversity are well documented. And I think this is critical to achieving that full, equal, and informed participation in policy decision makings that women and women agency deserve. And participation is not just about numbers of people, representation and leadership position. Of course, these are important numbers to achieve and secure and safeguard. But it's also about the capacity and the voice for women, especially to influence policies so that they can be gender responsive policies and laws and legal frameworks, and also influence the policy arena and the power dynamics around that policy decisions. All of this is key to removing barriers and enabling more gender equality. I will stop there. Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Christina, and all of you, dear panel. You have definitely said it clear. There are many possibilities for synergies between both agendas. There are already joint actions that are taking place, driven by government or by the civil society, and we must continue to develop them so both the lives of women and girls, as well as the prosperity of biodiversity, become a reality. Now, let us move to our second round of discussion. And considering that the human rights were identified as a prerequisite for a gender-just sustainable development and for the realization of the CBD 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, in first place, I would like to ask Catherine to tell us what are the most promising strategies and actions today for overcoming gender inequality and discrimination. And if you can tell us how can the empowerment of women and girls accelerate SDG progress, recovering from COVID-19, and implement the post-2020 GDF. Please, Catherine.
Thank you, Amelia. I'm going to touch upon the issue of visibility and the lack of data that have been mentioned by Christina and Sylvia. Is very important to make visible the role that women and girls play in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and their role in their environment. The issues related to decision-making, to access and to the benefits from conservation and sustainable use, and their equal representation in decision-making have been highlighted at a global scale, but it's very important to understand these issues and the challenges at the local and the national level. And there's a great example from Costa Rica. Many countries face the challenges of collecting data, of using indicators and visualizing this information. So what Costa Rica did is that in partnership with international organizations, with UN agencies and their local organizations and their own ministries, what they did is that they wanted to understand the role that women and men play in specifically in the forest sector, to think about sustainable options for restoration and the sustainable use of forests. And what they did is that they overlaid data from the national statistics offices, as well as environmental data that had been collected through different projects. For example, one of them, REDD+, but others. And with support from technical capacity from UN agencies, they did overlay analysis, trying to understand what areas of the forest were being used, which areas needed to be restored, identify the role that women and men play by using sex disaggregated data. And with the analysis and maps that they generated through this study, they were able to update their policies and the strategies. And these serve to identify interventions and solutions that would benefit local women and local men. This is just one specific example from Costa Rica, but there are similar efforts that are being carried out in Mexico and Malawi, for example, and I think they provide key best practices that show us what it means to address gender equality on the ground. What does it mean to make visible the roles that women and men play in the environment? And this is well aligned to the SDGs goals that are being reviewed right now in the high-level political forum, and also aligned with key goals and targets from the post-2020 framework. Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing these concrete examples, because by doing so, you tell us that there is no excuse of not making these synergies between agendas, and also that governments are already doing it and that they are committed to deliver both objectives. And now I will then move on with the rest of our panel. And I will ask you to, first, Christina, to address our question regarding how could the integration of human rights-based components into the post-2020 GDF contribute to addressing the SDG 5, 14, and 15. Please, Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you, Catherine, for making very clear the point and providing excellent examples. I think that explains more than a lot of other words. What needs to be done and can be done. I think this is an important message. I would say that, again, as a conservation organization, we're come to realize that a GBF that is not a global biodiversity framework that is not embedded in a strong rights framework is not going to be successful, it's not going to be transformative, it's not going to be ambitious, it's not going to be all that we need to have in order to address the biodiversity crisis, and in doing so also addressing the other crises. And this framework also needs to be accountable that is, it can be verified what we are actually, can be measured, but it can be also verified and see what impact and positive impact has had and whether it's working. And we also think that the key issue here is supporting, and this is what Women Caucus within the CBD negotiation has been wonderfully pushing and advocating for a gender standard on target, the famous target 22. Well, it's not yet formalized. On gender equality. And this is also something as most civil society strongly support, and party support has been very strong. Embedding a target is helping the accountability of the framework on the very important issues. After all, we are talking about half of the humanity, is not a small number of people that can be game changer, can be those agents that help transform the framework, but help address the biodiversity crisis. And the gender target has as Sylvia mentioned in the beginning, three fundamental components: participation, rights, and benefit. And the gender equality target would also bring the overdue recognition, visibility, and support to women as ecological agents of biodiversity, as rights holders, and not only beneficiaries. This is also goes along with another important component, which is ensuring women's economic empowerment at scale. And because with their agency, with their knowledge, with their practices, they can only help transform consumptions, productions, address those drivers of biodiversity loss. We need new models of economic development, and women are naturally and historically well placed to contribute to that. And in doing so, also addressing historical discrimination, poverty, all caused, especially, and women have been, especially women in rural areas, and indigenous women have been victims of this because of insecure land rights, because poor access to market, to education, to financing, to information, and cultural tradition. I think it's also, on the other hand, also important to recognize, bring visibility to all the positive initiatives of women by women, the solution that they are bringing, and there are many of them. A lot of them are the result of self-empowerment without the enabling condition, but still struggling and fighting and proposing good initiative. And all these local initiatives, most of them at the local level, matter and are important to be supported and to be recognized. This is something that we need to keep in mind while working on broader and more enabling condition at national level. And equitable access to land and natural resources is critical for women economic empowerment. And environmental and economic decision making. This is important. So in the context of GBF, I just end by saying that it's important, it's fundamental to have a gender standalone target on gender equality, but it's also important how to see that target catalyzing the mainstreaming, the gender responsiveness that needs to be in all the other targets and goals of the framework. And I think it's possible. It's not just target in silo, as Shruti mentioned, but this needs to permeate the entire framework for results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina, for this holistic answer, for the discussions that we have not only here, but also in the GBF scope. And you have mentioned many crucial topics, such as accountability, economic empowerment, joint governmental action, responding to the citizen priorities. But I will proceed with our next speaker, so we can have a conclusion and more discussion later on, based on all of your thoughts. And now I will give the floor to you, Shruti, to discuss about how could a gender responsive post-2020 GBF could contribute positively to the achievement of the SDGs, and how could mainstreaming the human rights-based approach, particularly the right to a healthy environment, rights to land and natural resources, could help to both the implementation of GBF and SDGs. Please, Shruti.
Thanks, Amelia. I'm so glad that we also touched upon visibility, because it's a personal example that I want to ask everyone who is listening in today. How many of us grew up with our grandmothers and mothers sharing home remedies for biodiversity around us? We are a generation that is losing this knowledge, at least for me, not only because of my changing needs and aspiration, also because I don't seem to connect with what is around me, because I don't see them. I don't see any of these tiny medicinal plants that used to exist when I was growing up. It no longer comes, and it's because of monocropping, land fragmentation, dispossession, which is rampant. And with biodiversity loss, things that we grew up with vanish from our vicinity without even us noticing, until you have a researcher or somebody or someone big coming and telling us that, hey, this is gone, is when we start noticing. But however, our mothers know, our grandmothers know that this world is changing, and the younger generation who are growing up listening to what it used to be are often fearful of the world that is being left with them. So it's very, very important to visibilize the role of women, especially in case of biodiversity conservation, of these tiny knowledge systems that is slowly losing out, which is also very pivotal to understand what kind of, or at what level biodiversity loss is happening. It's no longer about just about this many species, or this many tigers, or this many rhinos, or the big massive species, but also at these levels, and how those are interlinked to everyday living and everyday being of all of us. With biodiversity loss, and the loss of knowledge, it's also linked to loss of cultural identities. And it is very important that to be able to preserve and conserve biodiversity, we need to see these linkages of traditional knowledge systems, the cultural identities, to health, to food security. And it cannot be seen in silos. So having a human rights-based and gender-responsive approach to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework will emancipate those who've been repressed by decades of colonization, exclusionary conservation policies, and land degradation. This will also enable the full realization of many elements of the Sustainable Development Goals and build synergies with already existing work on ground towards a transformative and reformative way ahead. Now, the three elements that Sylvia spoke about, which build synergies with all aspects of SDGs, especially 14, 15, 16, and 17, and allows for affirmative and gender just action for the fulfillment of Goal 5, are one is the recognition of land rights for women and girls. Now, according to the Sustainable Development Goal Progress Report of 2022, it says that it's only in 8 countries that women have a higher share than men among the landowners, and the gender disaggregated data, even after 7 years since the Sustainable Development Goals have been adopted, is very, very small, or there is no data in some places. So it is imperative to have that as a first step. And then second would be to amend various land ownership policies, which would recognize ownership and tenure rights for women. The second aspect of Target 22 talks about full and effective participation. And I think Christina has already spoken about how we need to move beyond just tokenistic forms of representation and build processes that ensures their informed participation. And thirdly, the third aspect of Target 22 talks about equitable access and benefits from conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Now, as we have so many international commitments like the Rio Conventions, the Sustainable Development Goals, the IT targets, and now we have the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And we could see a lot of linkages, but however, there is very little awareness of these on ground also, and how people could even use this. So, and countries already have built processes and institutions, and they already have these institutions in place for attaining these commitments. So one must look at strengthening processes where there have been some positive development with respect to advancing human rights and gender rights, and rectifying processes which has failed with regards to implementation or achieving these commitments on ground, instead of starting from scratch. This would help build those already existing processes on ground, and people would be able to get a sense of how these goals and targets could be strengthened, and how, as Christina mentioned, could they ask for accountability, transparency, and also ask for a better system to be put in place, which is more collaborative and less top-down, and is coming from more from the ground. And it needs to also coincide with the existing legislation, national laws and policies, and could be used as a tool for advocacy to press for implementation, better implementation and monitoring. This would also create awareness which would enable higher participation for those on ground, especially from the marginalized group, like mostly women and girls. So at the end of it, it is very, very important that we need to have there is a lot of synergies that we could see, but it needs to be, it needs to ensure that these are kind of built in such a way that more participation comes, and it's more ground up approach, and therefore there is some sense of accountability, some sense of transparency, and therefore moving towards a more transformative world that we intend to achieve through these targets and goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shruti. And now we are going to move on with Benjamin from the Human Rights Office. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I think I'd like to echo and will echo a lot of the remarks of those who've spoken before me. Just want to focus on the ways biodiversity loss affects people they are different on the basis of gender, owing to entrenched and systemic gender-based discrimination and violence against women, stereotypes, resource limitations, differing nutritional needs over the life course, especially during infancy, childhood, pregnancy, and childbirth, and differing levels of exposure to environmental hazards. And as a result, states, businesses, international organizations, and other actors have procedural and substantive obligations and responsibilities under international human rights law and international environmental law, as well as international policy commitments to address the biodiversity crisis, including from a gender perspective. Applying an HRBA, a human rights-based approach to the post-2020 negotiations, includes ensuring the related processes are inclusive and participatory, and that participation is meaningful, informed, and effective. Access to information and access to justice and accountability are principles that should be embedded in the process of the post-2020 negotiations, their outcomes, and implementation. There are also principles reflected in the 2030 Agenda, including Sustainable Development Goal 16. The integration of women's rights and gender equality in national biodiversity strategies and action plans offers a critical opportunity to address the gender biodiversity nexus in the context of efforts to implement the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. The principle of non-discrimination, which is a fundamental principle of the human rights-based approach, is also a critical part of the 2030 Agenda, including SDG 5. So we know that gender responsive and rights-based action has to be reflected in biodiversity action. The question is, what can we do about it? And what are we doing about it? So OHCHR co-leads interagency work to advance the right to a healthy environment across the UN system, including under the Secretary General's call for action on human rights. OHCHR's key messages on human rights, the environment, and gender equality, which I shared earlier in the chat and were developed jointly with UNEP and UN Women, make it clear that states and businesses do have specific human rights obligations related to the disproportionate and intersectional impact of environmental degradation on women, girls, and persons with diverse gender identities. However, even while, and this is really important, experiencing differential and disproportionate impacts of environmental harms, we have to remember that women and persons with diverse gender identities are leaders in environmental action as managers of resources and advocates of sustainable lifestyles and defenders of land, water, nature, and communities. And the facts bear out that if we empower women, women and girls, we can actually make a difference, both in the effective enjoyment of their human rights, but in outcomes for all people. And so I'd say, in the last decades, 55% of the improvement in food security in developing countries came from programs promoting women's empowerment. We need to do more to ensure meaningful participation of women with diverse backgrounds in relevant decision-making processes. And this approach is a legal, ethical, and moral obligation, but it will also make environmental action more effective. So we've got to work together to create tools, laws, policies, and understanding needed to support gender-responsive, rights-based environmental action. OHCHR field presences work to strengthen protection mechanisms for environmental human rights defenders, promote accountability for environmental harms, address the gendered impacts of environmental degradation, and provide technical support for gender-responsive, rights-based environmental action. But our capacities are limited, so states need to back up their commitments, and other stakeholders as well, to the right to a healthy environment with effective gender-responsive mobilization of resources that are so desperately needed to protect the environment and to support efforts by the UN system to do so as well. Thank you very much. I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you so much, Ben, for your insights. Thank you so much to all of you, dear panelists. With your remarks, you have made blunt that the integration of human rights and the adoption of this approach in the post-2020 GBF is a game changer, driving transformative action that could help to achieve the SDG 5 on gender equality and strengthen the nature goals, the so-called nature goals 14 and 15. And even more, I think that now that most of the development policies are just focusing on recovering from COVID-19, with your insights, you are showing us that it is really possible to build back better while ensuring gender responsiveness, but also taking care of nature. Now, I would like to move on into our next section, which is an open dialogue with the audience. So if anyone has a question, I will invite you to raise your hand so you can come into the floor to have this dialogue with our panelists. Or if you don't want to raise your question by voice, please just type it down in the chat and we will address them. I can't see any question. Please let us know, or simply raise your hand so we can give you a microphone. If there are Spanish speakers, you can also raise your question in Spanish because we have the interpretation with us. Or if you want to type it down in Spanish, we can translate it. We have one question from Magdalena. Magdalena, ¿quisieras decirnos para quién va esta pregunta? She's asking which is the major challenge that we are facing now and how we can collaborate. Magdalena, ¿quisieras decirnos para quién es del panel o es en general? Well, I think that if any one of the panel want to answer this question, please go ahead. Yes, Ben.
Sure, I can start. Thank you, Magdalena, for the question. It's a broad one. And I think part of the difficulty in answering it is that it's not really a single problem that we're confronting. It's a plurality or a bunch of problems, which are often interconnected and interrelated. So in the environmental context, we're talking about the triple planetary crisis, which is pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. But that triple planetary crisis is deeply interlocked with rising inequalities, power imbalances, entrenched and structural discrimination. And really a problem rooted in the way that the world and human societies currently work, which is why I think when we hear and see the language of the 2030 agenda, of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, when they're talking about vision, they're talking about transformative change. They're talking about reimagining humanity's relationship with nature. That's what we need to do. But I think when we get to the practical steps that are needed to achieve that change, then we get rooted back in these old patterns. Then we get stuck in the sort of minutia of negotiations, of differences of opinion about how to get there. And frankly, of a system that has perpetuated the current status quo, leading to environmental destruction, leading to gender-based violence and to discrimination against women and many other people based on different and intersectional status. So we have to realize that what we're pushing for is a radical change for this vision. And what we've been unable to figure out is how do we actually get there? The international community has agreed we need this radical change, but the steps to getting there and the process to getting there is what hasn't been worked out. I think a big part of that is finance. Not the only part of it. There's another big part of it, which is changing how people behave and think and act, and you know, changing how government institutions respond to rights holders versus other entities that engage with them. But a big part of it is addressing some of the financial issues and the way that our economic system works, so that we redistribute wealth to eliminate inequalities, so that we establish a basic social protection floor. So I know all of these things are sounding a little bit far afield from the initial origins of our conversation, but actually when we talk about a social protection floor, we're really thinking about that as something that is a basic fundamental necessity to be able to protect the environment as well. So, you know, I think, you know, understanding this big picture and trying to be able to address the multiple challenges that we're facing in a sort of comprehensive and holistic way is really critical. And that's where we think the right to a healthy environment, which actually brings together environmental aspects, social aspects, and sort of participation rights, all under one umbrella, can be a really critical tool in advancing and addressing these issues in multiple contexts, including the context of implementation of the context of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and work to achieve the objectives of the 2030 agenda.
Thank you so much, Ben, for answering. In the chat, Magdalena is saying that you and all of us, we can't own with them. She works in a university, and that there is a youth group that work together, and particularly with her specialty on bioethical ecology. Thank you so much, Magdalena, for raising this question, and I will know if anyone else from the panel wants to reply to this.
Yes, Amelia, I'll reply. I'll try to reply briefly, and I think just reiterating the importance of gender equality. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen the difference that it makes having women at the decision-making table in high levels of power. They've led the way successfully in addressing this challenge. So UN Women has done an amazing job at showing within the process of the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, the linkages between gender equality for not only for achieving this specific goal, but also for the achievement of all the SDGs. And this approach has been seen as something to follow within the post-2020 framework, and that's why the target 22 on focusing on gender equality is seen as something important to follow. So there's an opportunity in the post-2020 framework to make it gender responsive by focusing on gender responsiveness. We're saying we're highlighting a number of things: the importance of having a standalone target, the importance of collecting data that can show us, can show us the bigger picture on the roles and responsibilities and the contributions from women and men, ensuring that women have a role at the decision-making table, not only focusing on the framework itself, but also on the implementation mechanisms. We're talking about capacity building, the implementation of the gender plan of action, financing, as been mentioned. And if a gender responsive post-2020 framework is designed with view of implementation, this is going to contribute to all of those SDGs that are being reviewed this year, SDG 5, 14, 15, 17, and enhance the efficiency of efforts towards environmental and gender equality goals. Thanks, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And I will ask then if someone from the panel wants to address this question, or someone from the audience, if you have, yes, please, Silvia. We can't hear you again, sorry. Yes.
I don't know what's going on with my system.
Yeah, we can hear you now. I'm so sorry, Silvia, we lost you. Maybe if you try with your headphones. Okay, don't worry, Silvia. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Nancy, we can see that you have you want to speak, please.
Sí, muy buenos días a todas y agradezco mucho por la invitación porque
Nancy,
realmente...
Nancy, si nos das un momento, she's going to speak in Spanish, so please, if all of the English speakers can go into the interpretation room to listen to her question. Para que, Nancy, si nos das un momento para que vayan a la traducción de inglés y puedan escucharte.
Sí, está bien, gracias.
Adelante, Nancy.
Muy buenos días a todas y todos. Realmente, primeramente quiero agradecer por la invitación. Yo soy del pueblo Misquito de la costa caribe de Nicaragua. Mi nombre es Nancy Elizabeth Enríquez. Vengo trabajando con las mujeres indígenas de la costa caribe de Nicaragua. El tema de la biodiversidad a nosotros nos interesa mucho porque lo hemos enfrentado y lo seguimos enfrentando como pueblos indígenas. El tema del cambio climático con todos los que hemos estado enfrentando, el cambio climático, cómo nos afecta a los territorios indígenas, a las mujeres indígenas, porque de una u otra forma lo hemos enfrentando más después del año 2020. Enfrentamos 2 huracanes en la costa caribe, ETA y IOTA, y después con todos estos cambios lo hemos enfrentando diariamente, tormentas, inundaciones que viene a afectar la producción. Actualmente estábamos esperando, preparándonos para lo que venía de otro huracán aquí en la costa directamente donde nosotros, pero pasó por otro lado y eso no deja de afectar las inundaciones ahorita en los territorios, en las comunidades. Están llenos de agua, se han llevado muchas casas, los niños están sufriendo. Esto con la seguridad alimentaria afecta mucho porque pierde la producción y luego nos quedamos sin comida y eso viene a afectar mucho en lo que son a las mujeres con el cambio climático, que estamos viviendo en la costa, los pueblos misquitos de Nicaragua. Entonces, para mí, pues, no logré escuchar desde el inicio, pero es importante que nosotras las mujeres no solo estemos participando en reuniones, sino que estemos en la toma de decisión y también que podamos lograr el financiamiento para poder seguir apoyando y trabajando el tema de la biodiversidad y el cambio climático. Muchísimas gracias. Buen día.
Muchas gracias, Nancy. Thank you so much, Nancy. And I would like to know if someone from the panel would like to answer, respond, or comment to Nancy's comments.
Amelia, just quickly to say, I don't think that there was, this was a question, but it was great that Nancy provided a clear example of the challenges that indigenous communities face in terms of biodiversity degradation and biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. And it's a good example to show the urgency of addressing gender equality and biodiversity environmental objectives, because these have local impact, local communities, and we don't have time. The post-2020 framework needs to be aligned to the Sustainable Development Agenda precisely to be able to address the issues that Nancy was highlighting.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I see, Ben, that you also want to react to the comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because I think Nancy's comments were highlighting something important, right? Which is that we also need to think about how climate change and the biodiversity crisis intersect. And so, you know, climate change, of course, is a driver of biodiversity loss. It's also the response to climate change is a response that is looking at conservation as a potential solution, both in terms of mitigation and in terms of adaptation. And there's an ongoing discussion, which is really important within the context of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, about how to reflect this relationship between the climate process and the biodiversity process. And one of the things that's really critical, particularly when it comes to indigenous people's rights, is that we avoid a situation where climate change mitigation and or adaptation efforts actually result in negative impacts on the rights of indigenous peoples with respect to their lands, resources, territories, and traditional knowledge. And that's something that's the subject of discussion in a variety of targets within or relevant to the discussion related to a variety of targets within the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And of course also relates to the question of gender equality, particularly when you're thinking about issues related to land tenure, where so often legal systems discriminate against women and girls, that, you know, all of these things are really interconnected and need to be part of how we think about and approach the triple planetary crisis from a gender responsive basis. And finally, you know, the point I think I've made previously, right? But going back to the need to make available the resources to reform the legal systems so that we do empower women and girls, and so that women and girls, when they seek to exercise their rights, and persons with diverse gender identities as well, are able to do so. You know, it will benefit the environment, it will benefit human rights, and it's the right thing to do. So just thinking about all of these interlinkages really is something that Nancy's comment brought to mind for me.
Thank you so much, Ben. And we have in the chat the comment from Sylvia replying to Magdalena questions. So I won't read it out, but Magdalena, if you can read directly the message, well, our translator can also support you with this message. And we have a question coming from Priya Gupta, and she would like to know from the panelists your views on how the post-2020 GDF, in the view of this recent COVID crisis, how could this intersect with gender equality actions and strategies? If you can just give one or two comments addressing this, the intersection between recovering from COVID-19 and the GDF and gender equality. Who would like to go into this?
Could I come in?
Yes, please.
Yes. If there's one thing that the pandemic has taught us is also examples of resilience coming from communities, especially women who have, when the entire world went into lockdown, there were communities, indigenous people and local communities, especially women, the small scale farmers who were small scale farmers who were able to sustain and be resilient in the midst of lockdown only because their lives were so linked to the biodiversity. So they were able to be resilient during the pandemic. And such stories of resilience are often not highlighted. We only see stories of distress and stuff like, what is happening to the world. But these small examples or stories of resilience are also indicators of how, like Ben spoke about climate, the linkages of climate change and biodiversity loss, what happens and how communities and especially women women in local communities and indigenous people are able to adapt to these various challenges, which is either man-made or natural, could do. And therefore, those knowledge systems are very important and needs to be taken into account. Even after the resilience of these the examples of resilience, apart from that, there has been a growing trend of more and more women being linked to, let's say, agriculture. Like in the case of India, as more and more men are migrating to the cities for work, for diversification of their income, it's the women who are taking care of their farms. It's the women who are doing more farming. Similarly, with pastoral communities, more and more men or the male members of the households are traveling outside to cities to look for jobs, and it's the women who are taking their animals for grazing. Now, the problem, the challenges that they face is gender-based violence. The forests are no longer accessible to them. For farmers, they still don't have ownership, even though they are the ones who do most of the work. So with the Target 22, it seeks to address these issues where they talk about equal or even ownership, the tenurial rights of women needs to be recognized. And that's what Target 22 does, which is one of the things. The other aspect is to ensure their participation in these key decision-making bodies, which talks about their agency without actually having them there. So decisions about women are being made without women being present there. So it is very important for their informed and full and informed and effective participation. And of course, the access rights, the benefits of conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, more often than not, is never handed out to women. So these three elements that I mentioned before, which is part of the Target 22 under the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is also a part of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the Goal 5, will be able to build synergies there and enable the gender equality aspect of things to be able to advance towards a more just, equitable society. So that's my response. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shruti. And we have another comment from Selina, but I think that this was already addressed. She was asking a bit about the intersection of biodiversity loss and climate change and how this could be integrated in the policy work. But now I think that it was already a bit discussed by you then. So, and for the sake of time, I will ask our panel to move into the last part of this session, which is the closing remarks. And I will ask, Christina was raising your hand. Okay, so sorry, Christina. Before going to or maybe you could make the link to the closing remarks with your comment and your conclusion.
No, yes, thank you, Amelia. If you allow me to just underline the importance of the stories of resilience that Shruti mentioned. And I really wanted to comment along those lines because we have been relying on those stories of resilience for far too long. And so one of the challenges, the women take on these additional responsibilities, these additional burdens, and keep securing food and care and water and whatever for their communities. So, but this has to change. And I think coming back to the first question about challenges, one of the challenges really, and I think it's also a way forward, how we need to strengthen, come together as a civil society, as we are doing, diverse voices, but converging and strengthening advocacy, because if these best practices, these stories of resilience, these stories of self-empowerment stay as only best practices, they will never change the world. Things will stay the same. They need to become influence policies. They need to change the legal framework to enable security, protection, gender equality. And I think that's the most important thing. If I may conclude, just say that gender equality is not just an issue for women organization or for human rights organization. It really needs all of us, conservation organization, businesses, governments, and there are many champion governments for this coming together, because it's only with gender equality that we can secure our future and for the future generations. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christina, for these words. I will, before giving the floor to next panelist, I will ask our audience if you are able to open your camera so we can start taking some photos of all of us while our panelists give their last comments. Saying that, I will give now the floor to you, Ben, to tell us your main conclusions.
Thank you, Amelia. And I think that I think we have the roadmap. You know, we have the SDGs. We've got some incomplete pieces when we're thinking about the negotiations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We have the human rights treaties, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the other core human rights treaties. So we know what we need to do. And the challenge is that we haven't been able to implement. And that, I think, is the result of some of the issues I described before. Discrimination, structural inequalities, so on and so forth. And the way we get past that, I think, really is for more and more people to become advocates for gender equality, to push for gender equality. So Christina talked about needing to move beyond the good practices examples to wholesale implementation. And and so I think that's, you know, I think that's where we need to go, and we look forward to working to do so, to working to advocate for mobilization of resources, to working to support implementation of the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and to working to secure that strong standalone target on women's rights and gender equality in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. But we have to move beyond just getting those words right to getting the actions that follow right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And now we want to hear from you, Shruti. Which are your reflections from this session?
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be part of this panel. There's a lot to learn and there's so much more to do. As Ben said, we've already got a lot going, and we need to find ways to strengthen certain institutions which are working. We need to rectify the ones which are not addressing, which are not just, and we need to have a space for reflection. Of course, we have the monitoring mechanisms, but there is very little space to be able to go back, correct, and come back to it. We need to start building systems for those reflections and rectifications. A lot of what Sylvia mentioned about systemic changes, it will only happen if we were to start questioning what is already ongoing with what we need, which is a more gender just and more transformative society. For the transformative society, we need it to be something which, like Sylvia said, it's not just a women's issue, but everyone's issue, because it impacts everyone equally. Patriarchy as a system does not just impact women, but also men and other gender diverse people. And that is the problem of the institution, the principle, the system that has been put in place. And we need to change that, and we need to start right away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shruti. And now we're moving on to you, Catherine, please.
Yes, I'll be quick because my fellow panelists have already covered the key issues. One element that we need to consider is financing and resource mobilization, obviously, to meet these challenges and to meet the gender equality objectives. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I would like to know, Sylvia, if you want to come into the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, very sorry for that. Thank you very much for this rich panel. And I agree with what colleagues have said before. We need to strengthen partnerships. We need to encourage each other not to get tired, because these crises are ongoing and the challenges are ongoing. And we need to look at targeted actions to ensure women and girls can benefit fully of natural resources, of land, that they can fully participate and be leaders and be recognized as leaders. But we also need to recognize that these issues are not women's issues. We need women and men and gender diverse people to commit together for gender equality and human rights, so that we transform institutions, policies, and I would say also keep transforming ourselves. Thank you very much.
So sorry, I lost connection for just 1 second, but I guess that you finished your message, Sylvia. Thank you so much for that. And now, well, I would like to thank all of you, our dear panelists and our dear audience, because this event hasn't been able to be a reality without any all of you and all the effort that you have put before it and during it. I would like to tell you, everyone, that we are going to prepare a short document based on all the reflections that the panelists have shared, and including Sylvia's reflections, because the main idea of this event, as Tina has mentioned in the chat, is to influence the process that is going on right now. You know, the high-level political forum, where countries are reviewing the progress about how they are doing with the SDG 5, 14, and 15. And that's the idea of having this reflection, these insights about, from the different organizations that are represented here today, how they think and how they have seen that these synergies can be done. So we are going to share this document with all of you because you have been registered, and you can spread the word also with your networks and with the people you know that are in New York right now in the discussions of the high-level political forum. We will share with you also a survey, a feedback survey after we close this call. So please answer it so we are able to improve our work as a host of these kind of events. Thank you so much once again to Catherine, Benjamin, Shruti, Sylvia, Christina, and all of our team, the interpreters, Ale, Daniela, Sharon, that have been helping with the technicalities. Also to Claire and to Tina, we hope you recover fast.